Hey guys, Daniel here. This is another video, and in this video, my next guest, he needs no introduction. It's the legendary Gerry Conway. He is the man who killed Gwen Stacy, and he's created so much characters. He's co-created characters such as the Punisher, Killer Croc, Jason Todd, Firestorm, Power Girl, Jackal, Black Spider, Killer Frost, Man Thing, Miss Marvel, Plastique, Ben Reilly, Vixen, Slipknot, Count Vertigo, Weasel, and much more. He's worked on comic books such as Spider-Man, the Justice League of America, Batman, the Hulk, Ironman, Inhumans and Black Widow, the Tomb of Dracula, and the Superman versus Spider-Man crossover. There's very few comic books he hasn't touched. But Gerry has very kindly agreed to come on for an interview and let me annoy him. But Gerry, thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, it's kind of overwhelming to hear that full list. You tend to just do it day by day. So when it gets all summed up, it sounds a lot more than one thought.
Yeah, you created so much characters. Like I had to cut out so many. I was like, oh well, he did this guy as well. Man, how many did he not create? I was like, oh, I recognize so much names. Like this introduction could have went on for 10 minutes because oh man, you've created so much characters. Like it's fair to say you're a comic book legend. Like that's crazy. But yeah, so I did so many different things on the cover. But first, let's start off with the basics. So how did you get into comic books? Were you a fan growing up, or?
Oh, sure. I started reading comics probably fairly early on. My mother taught me to read with newspaper strips, and once I discovered comics, I was addicted to them. I think I picked up Fantastic Four #4 as the first comic, first Marvel comic that I bought. Before that, I'd been reading things like Justice League and Superman and Batman. And then when I was probably just a little older than you are right now, I went on a tour at DC Comics one summer.
Wow.
They used to have tours during the summer on Thursdays. And I found out about this. I talked my dad into taking me to it. And that's where I met Marv Wolfman and Len Wein, who were a few years older than I. And their approach to the tour was to get inside, and then as soon as they got inside, they'd head off and talk to the different editors to try to sell them artwork, or get a job, basically. That appealed to me, and I spent that entire summer going on the tour every week, and eventually met all the editors. And during the subsequent school year, about once a week, I would go into Manhattan from Queens, which outside Manhattan, and talk to the editors and try to sell them stories. My inspiration was Jim Shooter, who was just I think a year older than I was, and was writing Legion of Superheroes at the age of 13. So I figured if by that time I was 13, 14. And I was thinking, well, if Jim can do it, I could do it. So
Marvel, I'm just waiting for that email.
Marvel, no, I think DC.
Oh yeah.
Marvel was actually not very open to newcomers.
Really?
I think DC. Yeah, I think DC was in a transitional period because Marvel was growing at that time and gaining more attention, and as a result, DC was feeling threatened. They replaced the editor-in-chief with Carmen Infantino, who fired a number of editors and replaced those with people like Dick Giordano and Joe Orlando. And they were much more open to bringing in new people. And that was pretty much it. I and Marv Wolfman, Len Wein, Bernie Wrightson, Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, we all sort of came in around the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so did you get your start working at DC? Was that where you?
Yes.
Yeah. And so what type of books did you work on at the very start?
Well, they had these anthology books that were supernatural anthology books, House of Secrets, The Witching Hour, House of Mystery. And what was great about those for people breaking in is that they were short stories. So an editor could hire a new talent without worrying about whether the entire book was going to be a disaster. It might just be 7 pages that are a disaster. So people like myself, were given an opportunity. Artists were given an opportunity. Some of the old pros who hadn't been getting enough work were given a chance to redefine themselves. But it was a very creative time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then how did you work at DC for a while and then moved on to Marvel?
I worked there for a couple of years.
Yeah.
I basically spent my high school years working at DC. I wrote mystery stories and romance stories, which were probably very, very weird for a 16-year-old boy to be writing romance stories for young girls. And then I met some people at Marvel. I met Roy Thomas at a party. And Marvel was always the company that I wanted to work for. I mean, I was a huge Marvel fan, sure. So I asked Roy if there was an opportunity, and they had their own supernatural anthology books. He gave me a couple of stories to write there. Then I took the Marvel writing test, which consisted of writing of dialoguing several pages of a Captain America story drawn by Gene Colan to see if I could capture Stan's style. And I passed, and one thing led to another, and eventually I'm writing for Marvel full time. By the time I was 18. Yeah.
I mean, to do all of that at 18, maybe that's how I should break into comics. Just send DC an email and be like, hey, trust me, I'm a good writer, trust me, it'll all work. But yeah,
well, you guys actually, people from your generation, you actually have many more opportunities in a way. Yeah. Through webcomics and through creating your own material to show your talents at an early age. I was very lucky. My generation just happened to fall into a space where both companies were looking to expand, looking to compete with each other in a way that they had not for the previous couple of decades. So we were lucky. My group, my cohort was lucky, but your cohort has additional luck, of more self-created material. There were only 2 comic book companies. I mean, 3 if you count Dell, Gold Key. So there were not many options. If you didn't hit it at one of those 3, you were out of it. But now you have all the independents.
Oh man, absolutely. And there you go. I think you got lucky as well, but Marvel definitely got lucky because you don't just hire any 18-year-old and it turns out they're a fantastic writer. So I suppose you definitely had that working in your favor. But so then did Spider-Man come when you began working for Marvel?
I had been working for Marvel for about 1.5 years, I guess, maybe 2 years by that point. I'd already taken over Thor from Stan. I'd been filling in issues of various other titles, and the hierarchy, if there was one, was there were 3 main writers working at Marvel with a handful of replacement writers who would come in and out. So there was Stan, there was Roy, and then there was me. And anything that Roy didn't want, I would get. So Roy initially wrote a few fill-in issues of Spider-Man for Stan, but he didn't really like the character that much. So when Stan decided he was giving up Spider-Man, Roy asked me if I would take it over, and with John Romita, the artist, as the supervising me, I became initially the co-writer and dialogue writer of the strip. And after a few months, John left the book, and I became the sole writer.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you came on after Stan Lee, and did you feel a certain weight of responsibility or pressure? I suppose you could say, oh man, I have to write Spider-Man after Stan Lee. Did you feel that?
I did, but I also had the arrogance of youth, and the feeling that, well, I can do anything. When you don't know what your capacity is, you're less intimidated. But I felt a real sympathy with the character. I felt like I understood him in a way that I might have struggled a bit with Iron Man or Daredevil or Submariner, but Peter Parker was about my age. So he and I had similar issues, similar problems, and similar attitudes. So that helped.
Oh man, I can imagine. Like you just touched on there, like by the time you worked on Spider-Man, you must have been like 19, somewhere around there. And Spider-Man at this time, like in comic book continuity, he was around that same age. So did you think it was maybe easier for you to write him in the voice of, someone his age, considering that you are someone his age? So did you think that gave you a better grasp on the character?
I think it really did. I think that I had there was a genuine correspondence to Peter Parker's emotional development and mine at that time. So when I would write his reactions, they were authentic because they were the reactions of an actual 19, 20-year-old. It was not necessarily an older writer interpreting that character. It was someone expressing what he was actually going through. I had the same levels of financial insecurity that Peter Parker had. I had a sick parent, just like Peter Parker had Aunt May. I had relationship issues like Peter did. So all of those elements, provided me with a rich source of material that someone who came to the book from a different perspective might not have had. And that did help me quite a bit. Plus, I was a huge fan of the character and had been reading him almost from the time that the book started.
Yeah, absolutely. Like looking back at your Spider-Man run, it's some amazing stuff. So was it fun for you to get to kind of explore the character of Spider-Man throughout the stories? Because you did quite a few issues. So do you think that over time you maybe got a better grasp on the character of Peter, and maybe was it fun for you to explore him?
Sure. Well, I mean, initially the first few months, first say 6 months, I was working with John Romita, who, as I said, was my supervisor in effect. So to a large extent, the kinds of stories that we did were stories that John influenced more than I did. But after John left, I was able to start really putting my stamp on the book, and my skill level also rose. My professionalism rose. My sense of I learned a lot from John in terms of how to plot and pace a story. All of that, contributed to the work getting, I think, substantially better, in the second year that I was working on the book. And certainly that second year, which included things like the death of Gwen Stacy and the creation of the Punisher, was a much more self-assured 12 issues than the first.
Yeah, and I know, like on that run, you also worked with artists. Was it Ross Andrew? And I believe you guys would take photos throughout New York because you wanted to make the book feel more real. Is that true?
Yes.
Wow.
Well, actually, Ross and I really liked setting sequences in interesting locales around New York that people who were not familiar with the city may not have seen. If you grew up in New York, like growing up in Dublin, you know that there are spots that are very cool, and sometimes there would be things that Ross knew about, sometimes there would be things that I knew about. And Ross was an avid and would go to these locations and and to other locations around the city just to get a sense of the city. Ross's issues are probably the most authentic vision of New York in Marvel Comics, because he literally photographed from all sorts of spots that were kind of hard for people to get to. He would get onto the roofs of buildings and take pictures. He'd climb fire escapes. He'd go down out on the docks. He would get onto train platforms. I mean, just anywhere that he could to make it feel more like the city. He would do that. So it was a great collaboration in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe, is it true that during a Mindworm story, you guys got into a bit of trouble because you took a picture of a house and then people recognized the house? So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I had the premise of the story was just there was this weird guy who lived in this isolated house somewhere in the grasslands of southern Brooklyn, and Ross, as I said, he liked to get reference. So he found this one particular house that was off by itself in the middle of nowhere, and he took pictures of it, and he used it as the basis of the house in the story. And a few later, Marvel got sued, or at least an attorney wrote a letter on the behalf of the owners of the house, because apparently little kids recognized the house and started coming up and ringing the doorbell and asking if the Mindworm lived there, which not well with the actual owners. So we had to apologize to them. I don't know if we actually apologized in the letters page. We might have, but from that point on, we were careful to not make anything look like a particular private home. Public buildings are one thing, but private homes were off limits.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now this is debatably one of the most iconic comic book moments of all time. People think of Spider-Man, they think of this moment. And I'm so sorry for bringing it up because I'm sure you've talked about this, forever, but the death of Gwen Stacy,
Sure.
Just how did that come about,
Well, it was the result of something. As I said, John Romita was my supervisor on the book, and about 6 months into working on the book, 8 months into working on the book, John suggested that we raise the stakes by killing off a supporting character. His point was that in the newspaper strips that he'd grown up with as a kid, is particularly things like Terry and the Pirates. Killing off a supporting character was a way to remind readers that you didn't want to miss something. You didn't want to miss an issue. You wanted to keep involved because sometimes something dramatic could happen that would change everything. So John suggested we kill off a supporting character, and his suggestion was for Aunt May. And I did not like that idea because I felt Aunt May was definitely critical to Peter's problems. The problems that create crises for him as a character at that time.
Sorry, Gerry, can you hear me? The internet isn't great. Can you hear me okay? Oh, sorry. Can you hear me there? I'm afraid I think we just cut out.
I can hear you now.
Yeah, all right, let me just go full screen again. All right, I'll just cut all this part out. But yeah, so sorry. I don't know what that must have been a problem with Zoom. But can you just continue from where you were speaking about you said no to Aunt May because you thought she was vital?
Right. I thought she was vital to the book. I thought Aunt May still had a lot to contribute story-wise and thematically to Peter's crises. On the other hand, Mary Jane Watson was someone who I had felt since her introduction. That classic face a tiger, you just hit the jackpot.
Yeah.
That she was the foil for Peter. That she would be, a really strong character that could play off of him, and he could play off of her, because she was kind of everything that Peter wasn't. She was irresponsible. She was sarcastic and independent, didn't have a sense of gravitas, weighing her down, at least as far as Peter knew. As we ultimately found out, there was a lot more below the surface. But Gwen Stacy to me was just bland beyond words, and as the writer, there was nothing for me to grab hold of. She was a good girl. That was basically it. She was a very sweet, nice girl who had no obvious flaws as far as I could tell, and that is the very interesting character for a creator. She was based. I mean, and it's understandable why that's true, because I believe she was based on Stan Lee's wife. Stan had created Gwen Stacy in his own personal view of his wife Joan. This elegant, beautiful blonde, unblemished, perfect lady. And that's just not a very interesting character. So I just said, well, how about we kill off Gwen, his girlfriend. And John thought that was fine. Roy Thomas, who was the editor at that point, he thought that was fine. And we ran it past Stan, and he thought it was fine. So we did the story. And that was pretty much how it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure, what was the fan reaction like?
Well, it was not positive. Let's put it this way: I would have been Twitter murdered today. The mail was, I would say, at that time we got physical letters, and it was universally panned.
Wow!
People hated it. We had small conventions, like 300-400 people, and I would get booed at the conventions. It was pretty brutal. So it was so bad that Stan, who was getting heat himself at these college lectures that he was doing, came up with this story that he had been out of town when it was decided. So it was all Gerry. It wasn't Stan at all.
Yeah,
which I appreciated. And then he said, "You have to bring her back. You have to find some way to bring her back, so these kids will stop bothering me." And I was like, "We can't do that. The whole point is that she's dead. It's a tragedy. Peter, accepted it. It's now part of his life." And Stan didn't care. Bring her back any way you want. You can get rid of her again as long as you kill her, but just bring her back. So that's why we came up with the clone story, which also incidentally led to the creation of the Punisher.
Absolutely. And you've just given me a perfect leeway there, the Punisher. So how did that come about? What made you say, okay, we should create this? Because he originally came about as a villain. So did you say we should give Spider-Man a new villain?
Well, the idea was, I knew that we were going to be putting together this months-long story around this new character, the Jackal. And to make the Jackal, as we introduced him, seem more powerful than just this figure, that's lurking in the darkness, we introduce him by giving him a henchman who himself is kind of threatening and powerful. And the original concept, it was just simply an assassin character, a hired assassin. In fact, that was his name, the Assassin.
Oh, wow.
But as we developed it from my initial sketch, which was just this character all in black with a little white skull on his chest, John Romita took that and expanded it into that iconic skull symbol across his entire torso. And then that looked so good that we went to Stan and we said, we need a new name for this character, and I couldn't come up with one that would be equal to what the character does. And Stan suggested the name The Punisher. So that led to, as I was writing the character, uh, I saw some interesting potential, for him to be not quite a completely black and dark character, but a guy with his own, moral code of some kind.
Yeah.
Which gave us an opening into developing even further as time went by.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's been like a lot of debate around this. So do you consider the Punisher like a superhero, or a lot of people kind of said, oh, he's more of a bad guy, or do you consider him an anti-hero, or what's your stance on that?
Well, I think that he would tell you himself that he's not a good guy. That he believes that he is necessary.
Yeah.
That he goes after the people that justice that the law is not able to take down. So he's definitely an outlaw. He's a vigilante, which all the superheroes are to one degree or another. But he goes further than they do. He acts as judge, jury, and executioner.
Yeah.
So he doesn't play by the rules of law and order. And I think he considers himself a damned soul, but he's doing it because he feels it's necessary. Now, some people would call that an anti-hero. Some would call it a bad guy. I think I just use the word outlaw. That I think defines it the best for me.
Absolutely. I think that's just perfect there, because like now the Punisher, he's a pretty huge character now. And like I said, like he's my dad Simon's favorite character, comic book character of all time.
Sure.
So what's it like looking now at the TV shows and like the new Netflix TV show, which I think is amazing, and seeing, the character that you created in all these countless movies and TV shows? Is it a bit like surreal for you? And what are your thoughts on the Punisher?
Oh, it's totally surreal. I mean,
wow.
I was 21, when I did that character, co-created it with John and Ross. And at that time, we had no expectations for anything happening with comics. We actually thought the business might be collapsing in a few years because the sales had shrunk tremendously.
Wow.
There was no ancillary market for other venues. We didn't have, I think the Spider-Man TV show and the Hulk TV show didn't come out until much later in the decade.
Wow.
And the Superman movie didn't happen until 78. So, in 73, we weren't thinking that any of this was going to be around for the rest of our lives. And the idea that 50 years later, here we are, is kind of mind-boggling to me. I loved the TV series. I thought Barenthal did a terrific job portraying the character. And I'm disappointed by the embrace of the character by far right, groups in the United States. So it's probably a good thing if Marvel backs off from it for a few years, and then can find some way to reinvent the character in a manner befitting, his actual origins. So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you recently did something kind of reclaiming the Punisher logo for Black Lives Matter, because Black lives absolutely do matter.
Yes.
So what was that like? So did you decide that you should kind of just reclaim that logo, or how did that come about for you?
Well, I mean, it had become so offensive that police unions were using it, individual cops were using it, these right-wing militias were using it, and they were using it as a symbol of oppression, as a symbol of domination, which is not what the character was about. As I say, he's an outlaw. He's not a symbol of law and order. He's a symbol of law and disorder, of disorder in the law. Yeah. And he's a failure of social institutions. Yeah. So, if anything, he, in my imagination, he would probably see himself more on the side of Black Lives Matter than on the side of the police, beating and killing innocent Black people. So it occurred to me, I talked it over with my wife, that maybe there was something we could do by creating a counter symbol. Reclaiming the skull as a symbol of the oppressed rather than the oppressor. And as a result, we opened this kind of not really a competition, but just open the doors to young artists of color who would like to create symbols and using the Punisher skull as a theme for Black Lives Matter, and used that to create these T-shirts that we sold as a fundraising measure for Black Lives Matter in Los Angeles, which was our local group.
Yeah.
And we managed to raise about $75,000 for
That's amazing.
That group. So that was one of my proudest moments from last year.
Man, absolutely. That's really admirable. That's fantastic. So is there anywhere anyone can go donate to something like that, or is that still up and going? Or
I'm sure that there are still opportunities to donate to Black Lives Matter, but that particular fundraising venue was done. I've actually saw one person wearing this shirt in the wild.
Wow!
I was at a store signing in Arizona last month, and one of the guys who came up to get something signed was wearing one of the BLM Punisher skull shirts. So that was cool.
Amazing. I thought you just saw one like actually out in public. So I imagine you just walked up with a Sharpie and just started signing all over. Don't worry, I'm Gerry Conway. I'm Gerry Conway.
No, I haven't seen them actually in the wild, but in public. So that was something.
That is definitely something. So everyone make sure to go check out anything like that if you can. But so coming off the Punisher, like you did some amazing work. What's it like seeing other writers take on a character that you created? Is that a bit like, okay, wow, this is a bit like, seeing other writers work on it?
Well, I never feel I never feel possessive of characters that I've created, because I've written other people's characters, so it wouldn't be really fair for me to say, well, gee, they shouldn't do this with my character when I have written Spider-Man and Batman and Superman. Generally speaking, I think most writers have found their own way into an authentic interpretation of the characters that I've created. I mean, the thing about the Punisher is that he's kind of like a Rorschach test, a social Rorschach test, in that each era, there's a way to interpret him that speaks to that era. What Stephen Grant and Mike Zeck did in the 80s, what Garth Ennis did, what Rick Remender did. Each of these people have brought their own take on the character, and that's all valid.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you put it perfectly there. And we also got to do some work on the Justice League of America. Would I be correct in saying so?
Yes.
And you worked on them. Would it be correct in saying 8 years?
8 years straight, and I think actually I did do some issues before I took the book over as the sole writer. So had a fairly long run on that title.
What was it like getting to work on the Justice League of America? That must be like a childhood dream come true.
It literally was a childhood dream come true, because Justice League is one of those books that I can remember reading as a child. I still remember reading the Kanjuro first appearance of Kanjuro. This classic like a galley, a space galley, spaceship that they're rowing through space, and I just thought that was so cool. So getting the opportunity to write these characters, to do my own crisis stories, to play with those characters in that mythology was great fun. I think I had next to writing Spider-Man, that was among established books. That was my favorite to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now one of the most iconic issues is issue 200, where it's like, oh
Yes.
man, it's such a fantastic. It's like they're fighting each other, and it's all amazing. But so yeah, issue 200. What's it like getting to work on that?
Well, that was a combination brainstorm between me and my editor at the time, Len Wein, who was also my friend. Um, we were saying obviously we have to do something special for this book, and wouldn't it be great if we did what the book used to do, which was individual chapters with the heroes, teaming up in duos to go off and attack different threats, around the world. And then that led to the idea of using artists who were associated with those characters, so that you could have each chapter drawn by the iconic artist who was most associated with that character. And we were very lucky that we were able to get almost all the artists that we wanted to have on the book. So that was really special. I mean, I think there are very few single issues of comics that I've done that I can remember specifically. It's like I remember runs, but there's that. There's Spider-Man 121 and 122, 129. First issues of Firestorm.
Yes.
First issues of other characters that I've created, Ms. Marvel, but that one story I think stands out for me personally out of the whole JLA run, just because it was so unique.
Man, absolutely. I think it's one of the I'm not saying it's probably one of the greatest comic book single issues of all time. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
No problem at all. But yeah, no. So I imagine it was quite difficult to work in the Justice League of America as opposed to a character like Spider-Man, because you could easily write a whole issue just about Spider-Man. When it comes to team books, you have to say, okay, did I give Superman a moment in this series, or did I touch on Flash? So it's tough for you to kind of give all these characters their moment.
Yes. Well, you have to, and you have to balance that with, am I advancing both the story and in the case of Justice League, I was trying to create some kind of continuity, although I was not able to do that until we went into the Detroit era. But I storylines that might run over a few issues with a character like Red Tornado, where we would do several issues that involve something with him, or Zatanna, or someone else who didn't have a currently running series elsewhere. Because that was the other difficulty with a book like that, is that if you had a character like Superman or Batman who has got a storyline going in another title, it's hard to make your individual issue feel like it's got any real weight, because the readers might be saying, well, I know that he's going to be fine because he's fine in the next issue of Batman. That came out after the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really did a fantastic job balancing that. But working on something like the Justice League of America for 8 years, do you think that over time you had a better grasp on how to work with these characters, not too dissimilar to Spider-Man? Like, okay, I know how this character acts, and I know what type of dialogue he delivers, and I have his voice nailed, and I know how to write a team book now. So do you think that was kind of a learning experience working on the Justice League for so long?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I was fortunate the first year or so working there. I was working on the character, on the book. I was doing stories directly with Julie Schwartz, who's kind of the master of the plot-based superhero story, or what passed for it back in the day at DC. And I learned how to do that. I mean, I kind of fell into it anyway because I was a big fan of the Gardner Fox school of plotting, so that was easy enough for me to do. But then getting a sense of how to make it play and balance, you do definitely develop your skills over the better part of a decade. Either that or you should stop.
Yeah, but absolutely. So, like, coming off Just Leave America, another DC character you got to do a bit of work on was Batman. Now, I mean, getting to work on Batman, what was that like? And of course, you created literally, if not one of my favorite Batman villains, Killer Croc. Like, literally, like when I was young, I asked my parents for Christmas, just to get me this like Killer Croc 8-inch figure from Batman Arkham Asylum. And playing that game was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced.
Oh, it's a great game.
It's fantastic,
Yeah.
but you have to sneak by Killer Croc, and I had to put down the remote and say, "No, no, no, I'm gonna take a break. I'm not gonna do this." And I had to work up the courage. But like getting to work on Batman, I'm gonna get into Killer Croc. But also like getting to work on Batman.
I love Batman. It's another of the. I, as a fan of comics, I was a fan of Marvel, obviously, and a fan of DC, even though they're completely different approaches, to storytelling and superheroes. But Batman, in particular, was one of the first characters that I fell in love with as a kid. When I picked up a copy of the first Batman annual and read all of these great stories that were drawn by Dick Sprang, who was one of the first really stylistic artists on the character. And then I fell in love again with the character when Gardner Fox, John Broome, and Carmine Infantino started doing the book under Julie Schwartz. So I had both of those imprints, in my mind when I came on the book, and that was what I wanted to embrace. And so I approached the character like a 13-year-old kid. That's how I wanted to read it. I mean, a lot of people today like the Batman of the Dark Knight detective character, this kind of bleak, stern, remote, psychologically maladjusted character. And that's cool. I certainly enjoy the book. But my Batman was a bit more of a superhero, more of a detective solving crimes, escaping traps, not lighthearted, but certainly not constantly depressed.
Definitely, yeah. And so then how did Killer Croc come about? Because man, what a villain. So how did you come up with the concept for Killer Croc?
Well, one of my approaches to writing any hero is will give him the most problem. What will take him out of his comfort zone. And Batman is a creature of the night who thrives on rooftops. He swings on the bat rope between rooftops. He chases villains through the city streets in his Batmobile. He, this is the Batman that I was writing. He's a surface character. Yeah. Bats are surface creatures. The idea that he would be at a tremendous disadvantage down under the ground, in a sewer, is sort of like the worst possible place for Batman to be. So that was an environment that I wanted to do. And then there were these classic stories about kids back in the 1950s and 60s. Kids were supposedly flushing baby alligators that they'd gotten as pets down the toilets, and there was this notion that somehow these giant albino alligators were infesting the sewers of New York City. So that was like a common, urban myth, at the time. So I was thinking, what can I do with that? And alligator didn't sound particularly interesting to me, and there was this kind of catchy sound to croc, crocodile, yes. Croc. And there's a joke. Comedians will tell you that the K sound is always funny, but the K sound the K sound is also really good for a bad guy, Kang the
Yes.
Conqueror, right? So or low key. So you that was in my head, and Killer Croc just came out. That's a good kind of name, Killer Croc. I'd had a character called Killer Frost in Firestorm, and in the course of developing him, my idea was to treat him more as a Dick Tracy kind of villain. A man who was deformed, and had this skin condition that made him look like a crocodile. And then, of course, the character that you played in Arkham Asylum is actually based on the animated TV version of the character, which took that notion of the deformed man and turned it into a mutated combination human crocodile beast monster. And that's a really excellent, upgrade, as I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, not only did Killer Croc actually appear in Batman, the animated series, he also appeared in the Suicide Squad film. And I remember watching that trailer, and I sat there and I think, oh my God, Killer Croc is real. I'm not watching this film. This is terrifying. I didn't know he actually existed. I thought he was a video game character. I'm not watching. I was like 7, and I was like, oh, wow, he's out there somewhere. Not watching it. But of course, I did end up watching it. But I was like getting to see your character in a huge film such as the Suicide Squad. And like, speaking of which, this more recent Suicide Squad, another character created by you, the Weasel, appeared in this. So we'll get into that. But seeing Killer Croc in this Suicide Squad film, what was that like?
Oh, it was great. It was great. Especially because they treated him more like the version that I had created, the man with a bad skin condition. So that was a real thrill. And it was, financially rewarding too. So that also helps. So it was fun to see. I really wish that James Gunn had managed to bring him back for this one, but maybe he'll show up elsewhere. And then with regard to the Weasel, I love the fact that they just took the name, and turned out this really funny new variation on it. I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, me and my family, we somehow managed to get into the cinemas despite the fact that at 16, we came away from the film. I was like, so who's your favorite character? And my mom, Donna, and my sister, Katie, both said Weasel. And I was sitting there thinking, what? We just sat here for 2.5 hours watching all these amazing characters. And your favorite character is Weasel? And he just has that charm. And my sister won't stop sending me compilations.
It's so funny.
I know, and my sister keeps on sending me videos of Weasel clips for 1 minute. I'm like, stop bothering me. I know he's in the film, but yeah. So I'm also like getting credited on that film. That must have been like,
oh wow, great fun. Yeah. I mean, we always like getting credit. I mean, who doesn't?
And
I'm always happy when they acknowledge our work. And there was a lot of our work actually in that film. The whole Starro sequence. I believe was fairly heavily influenced by the Justice League Starro story that I did, with Starro creating the little Starros that go on people's faces. There's that terrific Brian Boland cover that I believe influenced some shots in the film.
So you did that comic where Starro had these little like 8 face huggers? Oh, that's amazing, man.
Yeah, that was from Justice League. Yeah.
Oh, that iconic Brian Boland cover. Oh, that must have been so cool. And then seeing Starro. If this film came out a couple of years ago, I would have said, "Oh, Starro's real as well." Oh, why? Because I have to deal with this walking crocodile and this giant starfish. That was crazy. But yeah, no. So the Starro face huggers. Well, how did you come up with that concept?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not clear enough on my. It's decades ago, so I'm not sure whether that was my idea or whether that was something that had happened in a previous story. But that was during a period. I tried to bring back for Justice League characters that had not been seen for decades. That was kind of my thing. I brought back Despero. I brought back Starro. I brought back. Felix Faust, I mean, just people that had been forgotten, or just not used very often. you're right. At least I do in part for myself, and for the fanboy in me. So there was a fanboy in me that wanted to see all these characters back.
Oh man, absolutely. And so speaking of Suicide Squad, like you created a lot of characters. Like the Suicide Squad, odds are my favorite comic book team of all time. And you've created characters like such as, like not only Weasel, but Count Vertigo and like Vixen, Slipknot, and all these different characters like Plastique as well, who have all appeared. And like probably my favorite, Black Spider. Like I recently made a video, top 10 underrated Batman villains, and I put Black Spider on the list because I think he's just amazing. If I ever get to be a writer and I work in the Suicide Squad, Black Spider's on my team. I think he's just amazing. But so seeing the characters that you've created in team books, is that a different feeling as opposed to seeing them on their own?
No, I mean it's just great to see see them and to see that they're remembered, and in the same way that I loved characters from my childhood, and would pop them into the stories that I did. Yeah. I imagine something similar, happens here. I know that, well, I don't know, but I'm assuming that one of the reasons that so many of my characters were appearing in things like Legends of Tomorrow and Flash, on the CW shows that were coming around, were because the people who were writing those shows were just old enough that they were reading my comics when they were kids. So that's what they were drawing on. The way that I drew on Gardner Fox,
yes.
To inspire me, they were being inspired in their childhood.
Yeah, definitely. And like Firestorm, another character you created, definitely one of my favorite comic book characters of all time. Like I said, I'm a huge video game fan, and I just play as him in Injustice 2 all the time. He's my most maxed out character. But how did the create a Fire? I know, like you think I should dedicate it to something productive, but I don't. I play I play as Firestorm. But so then, how did that character come about to you? Did you say I want to create this new teenager superhero, and then seeing him in like Legends of Tomorrow was that? But yeah, how did Firestorm come about?
Well, I mean, Firestorm was DC was looking to create some new books. They were open for new characters, and they had a nice for the time a creator equity program where you would receive more money for characters that you created. So I was inspired by that, to try to come up with something. But the notion, I loved writing Spider-Man, and I loved writing the teenage superhero. But one of the things that struck me, being kind of always interested in turning things on their head, like I said, with Batman, where could you put him that would be a disadvantage? You put him in the underground. With superhero characters, the teenage superhero characters, the usual trope is this nerdy kid who's smart and is underestimated by everyone, gets superpowers. And then he becomes the wish fulfillment, I can now do the things that I couldn't do before. And I thought, well, what about if it's not the nerdy kid that gets the superpowers? What if it's the dumb jock? What if it was Flash Thompson who got bit by the spider instead of Peter Parker?
Yeah.
And that was the initial notion, of how can I create this kid who would be the exact opposite of Peter Parker? And then the second notion was, how can I make that interesting? I had this name floating around in my head, Firestorm, for a long time. And that implied nuclear powers of some kind, a nuclear firestorm, like firestorms over Hiroshima. And then that led to, well, nuclear fission, nuclear fusion. What if he's fused with somebody else? What if that somebody else is an adult, who would be second guessing him, couldn't actually control him, but, is the guy who's like second guessing him, giving him advice, unwelcome advice, which is kind of like the basic teenage problem. You're a teenager, you're starting to feel like you're independent, but there's always an adult somewhere telling you what you should or shouldn't do, and second guessing what your choices are, and giving you advice you don't want or need. And that's the iconic element of Firestorm that I think made him special. It wasn't just the flaming head, it wasn't just the transmutation powers, or the really very excellent costume that Alan Milgrom designed. it's the fact that he's kind of an archetype for a particular problem that kids have, you know. So kids can relate to him. That's what I think is true.
Absolutely. And so do you think like your work on Spider-Man really like, okay, well, I know how to write a teenager now, so Firestorm should be no problem. So do you think that your work on Spider-Man kind of prepared you for that?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, definitely.
And being basically a child at heart, you know, and an ungrown teenager, you know, prepared me very well too.
Yeah, absolutely. And another teen character you created who's been getting a lot of love recently, one of my favorite characters, Jason Todd. Like more recently in the Titans TV show, he's turned into Red Hood. But Jason Todd, so did you know you wanted to create a new Robin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we had a problem, which was it wouldn't have been a problem for some other writer, but it was a problem for me, which was I really liked the Batman Robin dynamic.
Yeah.
But Robin was too old for it. Dick Grayson, by that point, was clearly a young man in his early 20s. And that's a very different dynamic than a kid, you know, with Batman. Plus, he was the star of Teen Titans, which was DC's best-selling book. And that book, like Batman, had heavy continuity.
Yeah.
And you couldn't really make the two work together. So it was kind of a joint decision that Dick Grayson would basically be written out of Batman and turn into Nightwing. Marv wanted to create this character and give him a whole new look and a whole new adult presence. That would be Nightwing. And in turn, I was going to create a new Robin that would be a younger, you know, version of Dick Grayson, you know, similar to him in certain ways, but with the potential to be a different character. And that was Jason Todd. After I left the book, you know, the writers that came onto the book at that point were less interested in a Batman Robin type story. They wanted to do the lone detective, you know, the brooding dark hero.
Yeah.
So the decision was made to write him out of the book, but the question was how they were going to do it. And they came up with that contest, you know, to see whether Jason lives or dies. And I believe it was just like a few hundred votes made the difference, or you know, a few dozen votes made the difference between living or dying. So,
amazing.
All things considered, he was better off dead, because then he could come back as a new character.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like seeing him now, he's like, I was literally in a shop today and I saw like a cover with Red Hood on it. It was like a new Titans magazine or something. So I mean, seeing your work live on through stuff like that, that must be like, you know, amazing. But yeah, so another thing I want to touch on is like probably one of your works you're best known for is the Marvel and DC crossover, Spider-Man versus Superman. What an amazing story. Just so, and then like something like that, I don't think we'd get something like that nowadays. So how did that come about? Like, were you in contact with DC and Marvel, and like how did that come together?
I didn't have anything to do with setting it up. That was the work of a man named David Obst, who was an agent. He was an agent for Woodward and Bernstein, the authors of All the President's Men. And so he had approached Stan to become Stan's agent for books, you know, that Stan wanted to do. And in the course of talking about it, David was a fanboy, you know, in his own right. And he said, why is it that Marvel and DC have never done a crossover with your two main characters, Spider-Man and Superman? And Stan said, well, you know, there's absolutely no way we could ever make that happen, because we hate each other as companies. You know, we're competitors. You know, it's never going to happen. And Opes said, well, if I could put it together, would you have any objection to it? And Stan said, no, I would have no objection, but you'll never be able to do it. And so then he did it. He managed to convince both companies that it was in their interest to do it. And then just through happenstance, my good fortune, I had just come over to DC, and the terms of the deal that Opes had negotiated was that DC would supply the writer and Marvel would supply the artist. And Carmen Infantino who had brought me over to DC, said, would you like to do this book? This would be great because you've written both characters. And I said, sure. And I recommended Ross because Ross had drawn both Superman and Spider-Man. That's how it happened. And they pretty much left us alone. Both companies kind of let their, Marvel didn't really want to have anything to do with it for whatever reason. I don't know why. And at DC, I was basically, and I was an editor there, and Carmine left me to my devices. So it was basically Russ and I doing the book without very much supervision, creating the story that we wanted to see.
Absolutely. And so, like, was it fun for you to kind of combine these two character aspects and like have Spider-Man meet Superman and then like kind of have them, I guess, go up against each other?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was a fanboy delight. I always felt that people who try to rationalize these worlds, these connections, are making a big mistake because there is no rational way to include these characters without spending so much time and energy explaining it that you're missing the fun of the meetup, which is really all that anybody cares about. So I just decided we're going to do a story in which there's a world in which New York and Metropolis are both real cities, and they're both have reporters, and these guys meet. That's it. Doc Ock and Lex Luthor are in the same jail. That's fine. It's just what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some other like separate characters I want to touch on that you worked on. One is Ben Reilly, and he's like one of my favorite alternate versions of Spider-Man. And so how did that character come about, for you?
Well, it was actually not I only created him in the sense that I created the clones Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But he was not intended. I mean, I never intended to have a life beyond that. So it's kind of cool that he does, but that's got more to do with the writers who picked up that storyline years later with the Clone Wars.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like just there, like seeing like I mean you so much of your work has been adapted onto the big screen. So is there that one character that you'd like to see in a movie? Like for me, it's definitely Black Spider. But is there that one character for you you'd like to see in a movie or TV show that has yet to be put on it? Yeah.
Well, not yet, but I would love to see an authentic young teenage version of Ronnie Raymond and Professor Stein. A new, a fully authentic Firestorm. Not one where he's just shooting fireballs, but the whole transmutation thing, the whole high school lifestyle, just that authentic take would be fun for me to see. Beyond that, I'd love to see an adaptation of Cinder and Ash, my adult comic that I did with Jose Garcia Lopez. Beyond that, I've been very, very fortunate to have my characters picked up here and there. There was an animated Black Spider did appear in an animated movie, I believe. Yeah,
Assault on Arkham.
He has, yeah.
Amazing. I think he's just such a fantastic character. And I kind of like the concept of someone with a drug addiction maybe turning around and deciding that's not who I am anymore and kind of overcoming that. I think that's just such a powerful concept, and I'd love to see more with that character. So DC, if you're watching, get that rolling, get that ball. So one of your other iconic DC characters is Power Girl. So like, I mean, how did she come about?
Well, that was answering some needs that I felt in reviving a Justice Society comic. I wanted to do a new version of Justice Society, but one that would have a larger component of young characters. And after bringing in the obvious young characters like the Star Spangled Kid and Robin, we needed a female character. And it occurred to me that we had never seen the Earth 2 version of Supergirl. And I thought, what if she's like not the demure, nice sweetheart, of Earth 1, but, a bit more of a ballsy, aggressive, feminist character. who didn't call herself after her cousin, didn't define herself in terms of what her cousin was, but defined herself as herself. Instead of being a Supergirl, she's a Power Girl. So
Yeah.
that was the premise operating there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she's certainly taken on a life of her own.
Oh man, definitely. And so I imagine that there's a bit more freedom working on characters that you created as opposed to pre-existing characters like Spider-Man. Because I know like it's definitely different for create your own series, but is it very different for because they still exist in the Marvel universe, but they're your characters. So is there a bit more freedom attested there?
Oh, sure.
Yeah?
Because nobody can tell you that's not what that character would do. If I say the Punisher would do X, people are going to basically say, okay, if that's what you think, say Spider-Man is going to do X, there could be more debate about it because it's a legitimate question. I did not create that character, so I don't know what motivates him. I may have a very good idea, but I would not be able to say with any authority based on first principles.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all know for a fact that Killer Croc probably eats people, and no one really has to debate that, because I failed that mission so many times. So many different parallel universe Batmans have been eaten by Killer Croc. So that's blood on my hands there. So yeah, there you go. So it's not my best decision, but I suppose we'll have to make you. But yeah, so another character that, and I'm sorry for bringing up so many characters, just like, oh man, look at your list there. But Miss Marvel, who I think is just a brilliant character, and I think that's kind of the basis for Captain Marvel. Wouldn't it be correct in saying so?
Yeah, I consider myself the godfather of Captain Marvel, rather than because the only thing I actually contributed to this. I took Carol Danvers, who was a character that was pre-existing, as she was like a security officer in the original Captain Marvel series, and I gave her superpowers. That's really what I did. I gave her Kree powers, and then whatever character development she's had after that has more to do with the work of Kelly Sue DeConnick than with my work. So I'm more like a godfather.
Yeah, absolutely. Character. And like it must be fun, like because
I can't hear you.
Here, sorry about that.
There you are.
Of course, it's so typical. I think everyone's so grateful that I just stopped talking for one moment. But yeah, so I think it's better we just end up now. But before we finish up, you on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, anything like that?
Yes, you can always follow me on Twitter. I'm at Gerry Conway, just GerryConway.
Absolutely.
I post a lot, and it's mostly of my obnoxious political opinions.
Brilliant. But before we finish up, are you on is there anything you'd like to talk about or promote?
Not at the moment. I've always got projects potentially in the works, but we'll see.
Absolutely. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, Gerry. It's been such a pleasure. I'll talk with you a little bit off air. But everyone, please make sure to go follow me over at Twitter at SamboGizmo1 or DanielFeed33. Please make sure to donate to the National Deaf Children's Society. There'll be a link for that in the description. And we touched on earlier, Black Lives Matter donation. If I can find something down there, there will be a link for that in the description. But thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you on next video. Stay safe and go check out Gerry's work. But yeah, I will see you all in the next video. And Gerry, it's been such a pleasure, but I'll see you all later.